Air Force Captain Marcus Thorne limped through the morning mist. 8 weeks after his medical discharge from Balad Air Base, his left leg still bore the metal fragments from the rocket attack that ended his military career. Behind him, Kaiser padded silently, the German shepherd's dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar terrain of the Montana wilderness. The dog had been his constant companion since those final days in Iraq, when the medics said Kaiser had somehow sensed the incoming mortar rounds minutes before they hit. Now, as they hiked deeper into the Glacier National Park backcountry, Marcus wondered if that same intuition still burned within his four-legged battle buddy. The morning air carried scents of pine and distant snow, weathered by years of military precision and haunted by nightmares of burning aircraft. While Kaiser's ears swiveled toward sounds Marcus couldn't detect, they had come here seeking solitude, desperate to escape the suffocating sympathy of well-meaning friends and the endless parade of VA appointments. Marcus adjusted his heavy pack, feeling the familiar ache where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone, creating a roadmap of pain across his lower back. The trailhead marker read, Bear Creek Trail, 15 miles to the remote cabin his grandfather had built in 1952. Kaiser suddenly froze, his body rigid with the same alertness Marcus remembered from convoy patrols in the desert. The dog's hackles rose as he stared toward a grove of aspen trees, their golden leaves whispering secrets in the mountain breeze. Marcus followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the endless stretch of wilderness that had drawn him away from civilization. Yet something in Kaiser's posture triggered those old combat instincts, the hypervigilance that had kept them alive through 3 tours of duty. Through the thin mountain air came the distant sound of voices, carried on the wind like fragments of a half-remembered dream. Marcus strained to listen, his pulse quickening as Kaiser's low growl rumbled deep in his chest. These weren't the casual conversations of fellow hikers. There was an urgency, an edge that made Marcus's scarred hands instinctively reach for weapons that were no longer there. The voices grew closer, punctuated by the metallic clank of equipment and the unmistakable sound of someone in distress. The wilderness stretched before them like an endless canvas of granite peaks and ancient forests, where civilizations rise and fall, but the mountains endure forever. Marcus had chosen this place specifically because his grandfather's letters had described it as a sanctuary, a place where broken soldiers could find peace among the towering pines and crystal-clear streams. His grandfather, Staff Sergeant William Thorne, had built the remote cabin after returning from Korea, seeking the same healing that Marcus desperately needed now. The family stories painted it as a place of transformation, where nightmares faded and purpose returned. Kaiser's behavior grew more agitated as they climbed higher into the alpine zone. The dog kept circling back, nudging Marcus toward a narrow game trail that branched away from the main path. This wasn't random canine curiosity. Marcus recognized the purposeful intensity from their military service, when Kaiser had guided patrols away from hidden IEDs and toward wounded soldiers who needed immediate evacuation. The bond forged in combat zones transcended ordinary pet-owner relationships, creating an almost telepathic connection that had saved countless lives. As they followed the unmarked trail, Marcus noticed disturbing signs that seasoned hikers would recognize as warnings. Fresh gouges in tree bark at shoulder height, too deliberate to be natural damage from wildlife. Scattered fragments of torn fabric caught on low branches, the bright synthetic colors suggesting modern outdoor gear rather than natural materials. Most unsettling were the deep boot prints in the muddy sections of trail, accompanied by what appeared to be drag marks leading deeper into the forest's shadowy interior. The voices became clearer as they approached a natural clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs. Marcus signaled Kaiser to remain silent, both of them drawing upon training that had become second nature during their deployment. Through gaps in the vegetation, they could see 3 figures gathered around what appeared to be a makeshift camp. Two men in military-style clothing flanked a third person, whose hands were bound behind their back. The captive appeared to be an elderly man, his silver hair matted with blood from a head wound. Marcus's military training immediately assessed the tactical situation. The captors were armed with hunting rifles and positioned themselves with clear fields of fire across the surrounding terrain. Their body language suggested familiarity with weapons and tactical positioning, indicating either military or law enforcement backgrounds. The bound prisoner sat on a fallen log, his shoulders slumped in defeat, but his eyes still alert, scanning for any opportunity to escape. The entire scene radiated the kind of desperate tension that Marcus remembered from hostage situations in overseas combat zones. The larger of the two captors stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the thin mountain air. "Where did you hide the rest of it, old man? We know there's more than what we found in your cabin." The elderly prisoner remained silent, earning a vicious kick to his ribs that sent him sprawling onto the forest floor. Kaiser's muscles tensed beneath his thick coat, every fiber of his being focused on the violence unfolding before them. Marcus placed a restraining hand on the dog's head, knowing they needed more information before acting. The second captor, a wiry man with a distinctive facial scar, pulled out a military-style knife that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy. "My patience is running thin, Henry. We've already torn apart your precious cabin looking for the gold. Your grandfather's journal mentioned hiding places, and we intend to find every single one." The old man finally spoke, his voice hoarse but defiant. "My grandfather died protecting those secrets from men just like you. I won't dishonor his memory by giving them to common thieves." Recognition crashed over Marcus like a physical blow. The elderly captive was Henry Blackwood, a local legend whose family had homesteaded this region for over a century. Marcus had heard stories about old Henry from the park rangers, tales of a man who knew every trail and hidden valley in the vast wilderness. More importantly, the rangers had mentioned Henry's grandfather, Jonathan Blackwood, who had supposedly hidden a fortune in gold somewhere in these mountains during the Great Depression, protecting it from bank foreclosures that had destroyed so many families. The larger captor grabbed Henry by the collar, hauling him upright with unnecessary force. "Listen carefully, old-timer. We're not leaving these mountains empty-handed. We've spent 2 years researching your family history, tracking down every document and family story about that gold. We know it's here, and we know you're the only one left who knows exactly where." Henry's weathered face remained stoic, but Marcus could see the fear flickering in his eyes as he realized these weren't random criminals, but determined treasure hunters who had done their homework. Kaiser's behavior suddenly shifted from aggressive alertness to something Marcus had never witnessed before. The dog began a low, almost musical whining that seemed to resonate with some deeper frequency of the forest itself. His head tilted at an odd angle, ears swiveled toward sounds that remained beyond human perception. Then, without warning, Kaiser bolted from their hiding place, ignoring Marcus's urgent whispered commands to return. The German shepherd ran directly toward the group of men, not in attack mode, but with the focused determination of a dog following a scent trail. The captors spun toward Kaiser's approach, weapons raised and fingers on triggers. The scarred man shouted, "Where there's a dog, there's usually an owner nearby. Fan out and find whoever's watching us." But Kaiser's behavior continued to defy explanation. Instead of attacking or fleeing, he began circling a specific area near the edge of the clearing. His nose pressed to the ground, as if following an invisible trail. His actions reminded Marcus of bomb-sniffing dogs in Iraq, the methodical search pattern that preceded major discoveries. Henry Blackwood's reaction to Kaiser's presence was immediate and profound. His eyes widened with recognition, not of the specific dog, but of something deeper, more ancestral. "That's impossible," he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bloodline was supposed to be extinct. The larger captor grabbed Henry roughly, demanding explanation, but the old man's attention remained fixed on Kaiser's systematic search pattern around the clearing's perimeter. Marcus realized he could no longer remain hidden, as his canine partner had essentially announced their presence to everyone. Making a calculated decision based on his military assessment of the situation, he emerged from concealment with his hands visible but ready to move if necessary. "Gentlemen, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. The two captors immediately swung their weapons toward him, but Marcus's calm demeanor and obvious military bearing gave them pause. "Well, well," the scarred man sneered. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero. You picked the wrong day for a nature hike, soldier boy." But his companion seemed more cautious, recognizing something dangerous in Marcus's steady gaze and controlled movements. These weren't the actions of a frightened civilian stumbling into a bad situation. This was someone who had faced armed opponents before and survived to tell about it. The tension in the clearing ratcheted up several degrees as everyone assessed the changed dynamics. Kaiser's search suddenly intensified as he focused on a particular spot where the ground appeared slightly different from the surrounding forest floor. His digging became frantic, claws tearing through decades of accumulated leaves and soil. Within minutes, he had exposed what appeared to be a corner of something metallic, buried beneath the surface. Henry Blackwood's face went pale as he realized what the dog had discovered, while the two captors exchanged excited glances that spelled trouble for everyone involved. The discovery transformed the entire situation from a simple kidnapping into something far more dangerous. The scarred captor kept his rifle trained on Marcus, while his partner moved toward Kaiser's excavation site. "Looks like your mutt just saved us a lot of trouble, soldier. Now we don't need the old man's cooperation anymore." But Marcus had spent enough time in combat zones to recognize when a situation was about to turn lethal. These men had no intention of leaving witnesses who could identify them or testify about their crimes. Henry's voice carried a note of desperate warning as he spoke directly to Marcus. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into, son. This isn't just about gold. My grandfather hid something else here, something that certain people have been trying to find for decades." The old man's cryptic words seemed to resonate with the captors, who exchanged meaningful looks that suggested they knew more about the buried secrets than they had initially revealed. As the second captor began enlarging the hole Kaiser had started, his excited exclamations confirmed everyone's worst fears. "There's a whole cache down here. Looks like boxes, lots of them." But his enthusiasm was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze. The distant rumble of thunder, though the sky had been clear just minutes earlier. Marcus's meteorological training kicked in as he recognized the signs of a sudden mountain storm system, moving in faster than anyone had anticipated. The weather change couldn't have come at a worse time. Mountain storms in this region were legendary for their sudden onset and devastating intensity, capable of dropping temperatures by 40 degrees in less than an hour. Combined with the approaching darkness, they were facing a survival situation that would test everyone's limits. The captors seemed oblivious to the natural danger bearing down on them, their attention consumed by the treasure they had finally located after years of searching. Kaiser abandoned the excavation site and returned to Marcus's side, his body language signaling extreme agitation about something beyond the immediate human threat. The dog's wilderness instincts were screaming warnings about the approaching storm system, recognizing patterns that humans often missed until too late. His behavior reminded Marcus of those final moments in Iraq, when Kaiser had somehow sensed incoming danger minutes before the rocket attack that had ended both their military careers. The first fat raindrops began falling as the storm front reached their location. Within minutes, the gentle precipitation transformed into a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards and turned the forest floor into a treacherous maze of slippery rocks and hidden obstacles. The captors struggled to maintain their advantage as the weather conditions deteriorated rapidly, their weapons becoming harder to aim accurately in the driving rain and increasing darkness. Marcus seized the moment as tactical conditions shifted in his favor. Years of combat experience had taught him to recognize when environmental factors could be leveraged against opponents who lacked similar training. The storm was becoming an ally, providing cover and confusion that could be exploited by someone who understood how to use natural conditions tactically. He caught Henry's eye and nodded toward a dense thicket of undergrowth that could provide temporary concealment if they could reach it without being shot. But Kaiser had other ideas about their escape route. Instead of heading toward the obvious cover, the German shepherd began pulling Marcus in a completely different direction, toward what appeared to be solid rock face partially hidden by overhanging vegetation. The dog's insistence was so strong that Marcus decided to trust his partner's instincts, even though the chosen path seemed to lead directly into an impossible dead end. As they reached the apparent rock wall, Kaiser immediately began pawing at what looked like solid stone. To Marcus's amazement, the dog's claws revealed that the rock face was actually a cleverly concealed cave entrance, hidden behind decades of accumulated debris and carefully arranged natural camouflage. The opening was just large enough for humans to squeeze through, leading into what appeared to be a substantial underground chamber carved from the living rock. The cave discovery changed everything. Instead of being trapped in the open during a dangerous storm with armed captors, they now had access to natural shelter that their pursuers didn't know existed. Marcus helped Henry through the narrow entrance while Kaiser maintained watch, his acute hearing tracking the movements of their enemies through the storm's confusion. The captors' voices could be heard shouting to each other, trying to coordinate their search despite the worsening weather conditions. Inside the cave, Marcus used his tactical flashlight to reveal an astonishing sight. The chamber had clearly been used as a shelter before, with evidence of human habitation, including old sleeping areas, food storage, and most remarkably, additional caches of materials carefully preserved against moisture and time. Henry's gasp of recognition echoed through the cavern as he realized they had found his grandfather's primary hiding place, the legendary sanctuary that family stories had described, but no one had been able to locate. The cave system extended deeper into the mountain than the flashlight beam could penetrate, with multiple passages branching off into unknown depths. Fresh air currents suggested at least one additional entrance somewhere in the complex, providing potential escape routes if their current situation became untenable. Kaiser immediately began exploring the various tunnels, his nose working to map the underground layout, while his ears remained alert for sounds of pursuit from the main entrance. Henry's voice trembled with emotion as he explained the cave's significance. "My grandfather Jonathan brought our family here during the worst of the Depression, when the banks were foreclosing on everyone and desperate people were turning violent. He hid not just gold, but also important documents, family heirlooms, and supplies for other families who had lost everything. This was their sanctuary, their place of last resort when the outside world became too dangerous." The historical revelation added layers of meaning to their current predicament. They weren't just dealing with simple treasure hunters. They were confronting people who would destroy a legacy of community survival and family sacrifice for personal gain. Marcus understood now why Henry had been willing to endure torture rather than reveal the location. This cave represented something far more valuable than gold. It was a testament to human resilience and the lengths people would go to protect their communities during desperate times. Outside, the The storm continued to intensify, but the sounds of pursuit were growing closer. The captors had apparently decided to search systematically despite the weather, their desperation overriding common sense about mountain storm safety. Through the concealed entrance, Marcus could see flashlight beams sweeping back and forth as the armed men methodically checked every possible hiding place in the immediate area. Kaiser's exploration of the cave system suddenly became urgent. The dog returned from one of the deeper passages with clear signs of agitation, his behavior indicating he had discovered something that required immediate human attention. Without hesitation, Marcus followed his four-legged partner deeper into the mountain, trusting the bond forged through shared combat experience to guide them toward whatever Kaiser had found. The passage led to a second chamber, larger than the first, where Marcus's flashlight revealed the true scope of Jonathan Blackwood's Depression-era refuge. Carefully preserved supplies filled wooden crates and metal containers, while detailed maps of the local area covered portions of the cave walls. But most importantly, Kaiser had found what appeared to be a natural chimney that connected to the surface somewhere above their current position, creating a potential escape route that would emerge far from where their captors were searching. Henry's knowledge of his grandfather's stories proved invaluable as he identified key features of the cave complex. Jonathan wrote about this place in his journals, but I always thought the descriptions were exaggerated. He claimed there were multiple entrances connected by passages that followed natural underground watercourses. If Kaiser found the chimney exit, we might be able to emerge above the tree line where the storm will provide better cover for movement. The escape plan required careful timing and coordination. Marcus's military experience suggested waiting until the storm reached peak intensity, when their pursuers would be forced to seek shelter themselves. However, mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable, and waiting too long could trap them underground if flooding or rock slides blocked the passages. The decision required balancing immediate tactical advantages against longer-term survival considerations. Kaiser's behavior indicated increasing urgency about something beyond their current tactical situation. The dog kept returning to the cave entrance and pressing his nose against the concealed opening, his body language suggesting he could detect changes in the external environment that humans were missing. His agitation reminded Marcus of those final moments before the rocket attack in Iraq, when Kaiser's warning had been the only thing that saved their lives. The reason for Kaiser's concern became apparent when water began seeping through cracks in the cave floor. The storm was generating runoff that threatened to flood the lower passages, potentially trapping anyone who remained too long in the underground complex. Mountain flash floods were legendary for their speed and destructive power, capable of turning dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. They needed to move immediately or risk drowning in what had seemed like a perfect sanctuary. Marcus made the tactical decision to attempt escape through Kaiser's discovered chimney route. The alternative was facing armed opponents in deteriorating weather conditions while trapped between rising water and limited exit options. Henry, despite his age and recent injuries, demonstrated the resilience of mountain folk as he prepared to attempt the climb that would take them to safety or lead them into even greater danger. The chimney passage proved to be exactly what Kaiser's instincts had suggested, a natural formation that provided handholds and footholds leading upward through solid rock. The climb was challenging but manageable, with Kaiser somehow managing to navigate the vertical surfaces using techniques that defied normal canine capabilities. His determination to reach the surface drove him to attempt moves that seemed impossible for a four-legged animal. As they climbed toward the surface, the sounds of their pursuers faded behind them, replaced by the growing roar of storm-driven wind through the chimney opening above. Fresh air and rain droplets indicated they were approaching the exit, but the conditions waiting outside remained unknown, Mountain storms could create visibility problems and hypothermia risks that were just as deadly as armed opponents, requiring different survival strategies and decision-making processes. The chimney exit emerged behind a formation of boulders that provided natural concealment from anyone searching the area below. The storm had reached full intensity, with driving rain and wind gusts that made standing upright difficult, but also created perfect cover for movement across the exposed alpine terrain. Kaiser immediately began scouting the immediate area, his nose working to identify threats and locate potential routes to safety. From their elevated position, Marcus could see the captors' flashlights still searching the area around the original cave entrance, their determination undiminished by the worsening weather conditions. These weren't casual criminals who would give up easily. They had invested too much time and effort into finding the treasure to abandon their search because of a storm. The situation required immediate action to prevent them from discovering the cave system and its historical significance. Henry's knowledge of the local terrain proved crucial as he identified a series of natural features that would provide cover during their descent toward the main trail system. His grandfather's maps had shown emergency routes designed for exactly this kind of situation, when people needed to move quickly and quietly through dangerous territory while avoiding detection by hostile forces. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that they were using Depression-era survival strategies to escape modern treasure hunters. Kaiser's scouting revealed disturbing information about their tactical situation. The dog's behavior indicated the presence of additional people in the area, suggesting that the two captors they had encountered weren't working alone. This expanded the threat profile considerably, transforming what had seemed like a manageable tactical problem into something requiring more sophisticated planning and execution. The realization that they faced a larger organization changed Marcus's strategic thinking completely. These weren't opportunistic criminals, but an organized group with resources, planning, and coordination. The implications were sobering. If they had researched the Blackwood family history thoroughly enough to locate Henry and track him to this remote location, they probably had contingency plans for various scenarios, including the possibility that their initial attempt might fail. As they began their careful descent through the storm, Kaiser suddenly altered their route toward an area that seemed to offer no particular tactical advantage. His insistence on the direction change was so strong that Marcus decided to trust his partner's judgment, even though human logic suggested different choices. The bond forged through combat experience had taught him that Kaiser's instincts often perceived threats and opportunities that remained invisible to human senses until much later. The dog's guidance led them toward a section of terrain where the sound signature was different, where the storm's noise patterns created acoustic shadows that would mask their movements more effectively. This level of tactical sophistication went beyond normal animal behavior, suggesting that Kaiser was processing complex environmental information and making strategic decisions based on survival principles learned through shared combat experience. Their route took them past additional evidence of the treasure hunters' systematic approach to the search. Marcus spotted carefully concealed observation posts and communication equipment that indicated electronic surveillance of the area. These people weren't just armed. They had technology and coordination that elevated them from simple criminals to something approaching a paramilitary operation. The scope of the threat was expanding with each new discovery. Henry's breathing became increasingly labored as they navigated the treacherous descent, his age and recent injuries taking their toll despite his determination to reach safety. Marcus found himself supporting the older man while trying to maintain tactical awareness of their surroundings, a complex challenge that required constant attention to multiple priorities simultaneously. Kaiser adapted to the changed group dynamics by expanding his protective perimeter to cover their slower movement rate. The storm began showing signs of intensification beyond even the worst-case scenarios Marcus had considered. Mountain weather systems could generate conditions equivalent to Category 2 hurricanes, with winds capable of turning loose debris into deadly projectiles and temperatures that could cause hypothermia within minutes of exposure. They needed shelter soon, but their options were limited by the presence of armed searchers and the increasingly dangerous natural conditions. Kaiser's behavior suddenly shifted again, this time toward what appeared to be aggressive alertness focused on a specific direction ahead of their planned route. The dog's posture indicated the presence of immediate threat, probably human, requiring instant tactical adjustments to avoid contact with hostile forces. Marcus signaled Henry to freeze while he assessed the situation through techniques learned during urban warfare operations in Iraq. Through the storm's confusion, Marcus could detect movement patterns that suggested coordinated search activities by multiple individuals. The treasure hunters had apparently expanded their operation to include systematic coverage of potential escape routes, demonstrating a level of tactical thinking that elevated the threat considerably. These weren't random criminals. They were people with military or law enforcement training who understood how to conduct search operations in hostile terrain. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were trapped between rising water in the cave system behind them, increasingly dangerous storm conditions above them, and organized searchers who were systematically eliminating potential escape routes. Marcus's military training provided frameworks for analyzing such situations, but the combination of factors was pushing beyond standard tactical doctrine into pure survival decision-making. Kaiser made the decision for them. Without hesitation, the German Shepherd broke from concealment and began moving directly toward the detected threat. Not in attack mode, but with the purposeful advance of a military working dog executing a specific mission. His actions forced Marcus to choose between abandoning his partner or following him into what appeared to be a tactical disaster. Trusting that Kaiser's combat experience had identified an opportunity that remained invisible to human perception. The dog's route led them directly toward a confrontation that Marcus had hoped to avoid. Through the storm's chaos, they could see the organized search team coordinating their sweep pattern, professional in their movements and equipment, but vulnerable in ways that military training had taught Marcus to recognize. The storm was affecting their communications and visibility just as much as it was hampering the escape attempt, creating tactical opportunities for anyone bold enough to exploit them. Marcus realized that Kaiser wasn't leading them into a trap, but toward the resolution that would end the threat permanently. The dog's combat experience had taught him that some situations required direct action rather than evasion, that sometimes the only path to safety led through the center of danger. It was a lesson learned in the crucible of warfare, where hesitation and half measures often led to casualties that decisive action might have prevented. The confrontation came suddenly as both groups converged on the same piece of terrain simultaneously. Marcus found himself facing 3 armed men who were just as surprised by the encounter as he was, their tactical formation disrupted by the unexpected contact. But Kaiser was already moving, not toward the humans, but toward something that had captured his attention behind their position, something that required immediate investigation regardless of the obvious danger. The German Shepherd's action drew everyone's attention to a natural formation that had been concealed by the storm's visual confusion. Behind a screen of wind-driven vegetation, Kaiser had detected the presence of additional people who weren't part of either group. People who had been watching the entire sequence of events unfold while remaining carefully hidden from all participants. The situation was far more complex than anyone had realized. The hidden observers emerged as the storm's intensity forced everyone to seek immediate shelter or risk becoming casualties of the weather rather than human conflict. To Marcus's amazement, they were park rangers and local law enforcement who had been conducting their own surveillance operation, tracking the treasure hunters' activities for weeks while building a case that would result in federal charges rather than simple local arrests. Ranger Sarah Coleman introduced herself as she helped Henry Blackwood toward the emergency shelter they had established nearby. Her team had been monitoring the treasure hunters since they first appeared in the area, building evidence of their systematic violation of federal laws, protecting archaeological sites, and endangered historical resources. Henry's kidnapping had simply accelerated their timeline for intervention, forcing them to act before they were fully prepared. The revelation transformed Marcus's understanding of the entire situation. What had seemed like a random criminal encounter was actually the culmination of a much larger investigation into organized looting of historical sites throughout the region. The treasure hunters weren't freelance operators, but part of a network that had been systematically destroying irreplaceable archaeological resources for profit, treating places like Jonathan Blackwood's cave as nothing more than sources of valuable artifacts. Kaiser's behavior throughout the entire ordeal suddenly made perfect sense. His instincts had been responding not just to immediate threats, but to the presence of the law enforcement surveillance team whose scent signatures and equipment he had detected long before any human realized they were present. The dog's military training had taught him to distinguish between different types of human presence, identifying allies and threats through subtle cues that remained below the threshold of human perception. As they reached the Rangers' emergency shelter, Marcus gained full appreciation for the scope of the operation that had been unfolding around them without their knowledge. The law enforcement team had been documenting not just the treasure hunters' activities, but also the historical significance of the sites they were threatening, working with historians and archaeologists to preserve irreplaceable cultural resources for future generations. Henry Blackwood's family legacy was safe, but the broader implications of the case extended far beyond one man's inheritance. The cave system represented a unique window into Depression-era survival strategies and community cooperation. Historical information that had academic and cultural value transcending any monetary worth of the artifacts it contained. The treasure hunters had been destroying this irreplaceable record in their quest for immediate financial gain. The storm finally began showing signs of abating as emergency medical personnel attended to Henry's injuries and debriefed Marcus about his observations during the encounter. Kaiser remained alert throughout the process, his training keeping him focused on potential threats until he was absolutely certain that the danger had passed completely. Only then did he allow himself to relax into the companionship that had sustained both him and Marcus through their military service and civilian transition. In the aftermath, as statements were taken and evidence processed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the patterns that connected his military experience to this wilderness encounter. Both situations had required trust in his canine partner's superior senses, quick tactical thinking under pressure, and the kind of decisive action that could mean the difference between life and death. Kaiser had proven once again that their bond transcended normal pet relationships, representing a partnership forged in combat and proven in civilian crises. The resolution brought unexpected connections that extended beyond the immediate crisis. Ranger Coleman explained that the Park Service had been searching for someone with Marcus's combination of military experience and genuine love for the wilderness to help develop new programs for veterans seeking therapeutic outdoor experiences. The encounter had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and crisis management skills they needed for such an initiative. Henry Blackwood's offer to share his grandfather's stories and historical knowledge created opportunities for Marcus to connect with local history in ways that gave new meaning to his post-military life. The cave system would be preserved as an educational site, but it would also serve as a reminder of how ordinary people could find extraordinary courage when their communities were threatened by forces beyond their control. Kaiser's role in the resolution earned him recognition from the law enforcement team as an unofficial K-9 officer whose instincts and training had been crucial to the successful outcome. But more importantly, his actions had demonstrated to Marcus that their partnership still had purpose and meaning beyond their military service, that the bonds forged in combat could find expression in civilian service to their community. As they prepared to leave the mountains, Marcus realized that this experience had provided exactly what he had come seeking: a sense of purpose and connection that transcended his physical injuries and emotional scars from military service. The wilderness had tested him again, but this time the challenge had ended with victory rather than casualties, with preservation rather than destruction, with community rather than isolation. The drive down from the mountains gave Marcus time to process the broader implications of their experience. He and Kaiser had found a new mission, one that honored their military training while serving civilian needs. The Park Service programs for veterans would provide opportunities to help other former service members find the same healing and purpose that had emerged from this unexpected crisis. Kaiser rode beside him with the satisfied alertness of a job well done, his senses already attuned to whatever challenges might arise next. The bond between them had been tested again and proven stronger than ever, ready for whatever form their continued service might take. They had found their place in the civilian world, not by abandoning their military identity, but by applying those skills and values to new missions with different but equally important objectives. If you're listening to this story and thinking about the veterans in your community, take a moment to consider how their skills and dedication might be channeled towards service that benefits everyone. Share your thoughts about the power of partnerships that transcend species and circumstances, forged in the crucible of shared danger and proven in moments when everything depends on trust. Their story continues with each day they spend in service to something greater than themselves, honoring the legacy of those who came before while building foundations for those who will follow. Thank you for joining us for this tale of courage, loyalty, and the bonds that make us stronger together than we could ever be alone.